I'd prob I'd probably describe myself as first generation. I was born in Misawashi in Aomori, but after that we did a lot of back and forth between the states and Japan, and then finally settled in like Japan or the states when I was maybe about 4 or 5. So, but I would still probably maybe say first generation. Japan just means home. It really just means home to me. It's very funny because I think in like a lot of encounters with white American people, their expectation on a social level is kind of very interesting. There's that, especially with the American aspect of having to assimilate, but at the same time, if you don't do things of your culture, then you're not that thing. Which, people would be very like, oh, you're not really Japanese because you don't do this, this, or this. And it's very like, that's a stereotype, and and it isn't very necessarily tied to being that thing. I just think if you're born Japanese, you're Japanese. So there's that social aspect. Then there's especially that demand from the Japanese side that you should know Japanese, you should know these things, not, kind of abandon your culture, which I actually like, I would understand that, especially after not having spoken Japanese for so many years, because that kind of like ching chong thing um, really prevented me from wanting to speak it. But now looking back, it's like I wish I had. So there's that expectation from the Japanese side to like keep up with these things and don't lose your identity, which I feel like happens with a lot of other mixed race people. And then with other mixed race people, especially, or not just mixed race or hafu, but especially now in the current climate, there's more demand for Asian voices to kind of stand with the other races, like that social aspect of like maintaining your own identity, supporting someone else's, and looking up into keeping up what that culture is going through, what this culture is going through, and that culture is like very demanding to be worldly in a sense, which you can aspire to that as much as could probably really want to, which is good if you want to be really worldly, but to think about that aspect of like keeping up with everything that's going on is a bit hectic. So and then there's that demand. I think maybe people face on a social level, not just me as a half person or someone else as a racial person. You think about people's conversations, but there's definitely that kind of pressure I've felt talking with other people, Hafu Asians, about really kind of standing together and how to unite, how to break through different stereotypes, especially with Asian Americans, um, the invisible Asian, the model minority, the docile, submissive partner, things like that that we kind of have to overcome that are very steeped in invisibility and like ignored. So it's like, how do you speak above if that's how you're being perceived? And so there's that expectation as well, I think, for Asian Americans in the conversation. So I feel like even Asian Americans ourselves are always like, oh man, we don't do enough, but then we kind of overlook the work that's being done by other people or forget that we can speak on our own behalf. So then I think there's that expectation as well. So there's lots of different mixed expectations and pressures, especially when you engage more with mixed race people, Hafu people. It takes you on a trip. It was very funny expectations, speaking of going to Japan after so many years of not being there, because many American people that feel that they're cultured or say that they are, it's not just like a hipster thing, it's like just different groups of people, academics, people like that, who, especially as a Hafu person, like to dictate what side or mix that you should identify with or whether or not you're allowed, like the whole, oh, you don't do this, you're not really Asian thing. But there's also the whole like, oh, well, you're going to Japan and they don't really like Hafu people very well, or they don't, they're very discriminatory, which is true for people in different cases like that. But going there, I think especially for me, looking a little less European or white. The Japanese people, especially my friends, were very welcoming, very warming. New people that I had met were very wonderful. I think the culture is really aiming to change, especially in the city, in Tokyo. Um, but then, it's funny when people say those things because me personally, actually, my family, my Japanese side of the family doesn't really communicate with us. They were very against my mom marrying like an American, especially a man in the Air Force and military. So I know that about, Japanese racism or like, those expectations, those societal expectations. Like I'm very well aware of that. So it was very funny the way that Americans kind of dictate or kind of just assume that as a person, a Hafu person, I don't know about how my own culture is treated was really funny. But then going to there, the Japanese people are actually very like, oh yeah, we know that we treat people like this, or we know that some people treat others like that. They're like each person I'd met and talked to about this particular subject of being Hafu, they were very like, oh, we recognize this. This is something we need to work on. This is something we need to do. But it's for the American aspect, it was very like, Japanese people are bad, this, that, that. And it's like, not so sure. So like visiting Tokyo was really interesting because American culture kind of paints us as being very like not open to those discussions, likes to hide things and make everything look better than they are. But really, there was an honesty in Tokyo that I really felt. Especially, it felt really good because, like I mentioned earlier, there's that pressure to speak as Asian people and speak up. So that was a great way to open up that discussion as a half a Japanese born, American raised, but then Japanese identifying person to go there and hear their take on it was really cool. And so I feel, as far as that pressure, I was a little bit relieved. But I think more conversations should be had about Hafu, mixed race discussion, conversation things. There should be more of them.